The baby wouldn't stop crying. Rachel sat on the broken concrete behind the abandoned bus station, her shirt soaked in sweat and her hands trembling from hunger. She rocked the infant slowly, whispering, "Shoo, it's okay, baby. Mama's trying. Just hang on a little longer." But it wasn't okay. It had been 3 days since she'd eaten anything more than a crust of bread someone tossed in the trash. Her milk had dried up. Her body ached. Her vision blurred from exhaustion. She was just 19, alone in a city that didn't care if she lived or died, and now she had a baby depending on her. Tears slid down her cheeks as she pressed her lips to her son's tiny forehead. He was beautiful. Big brown eyes, soft curls, a warm weight in her arms that made her feel like she still mattered in the world. But what kind of life could she give him? They were sleeping on cardboard, begging for scraps, and Rachel knew, deep in her gut, that the city would swallow them both before the week was over. She had named him Eli, after her father. Not the cruel man who raised her, but the man in her dreams. A protector she had always imagined. A shadow passed over her. Rachel looked up, startled. A tall, thin woman stood there, wearing a worn but clean grey coat. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but not unkind. "Is that your baby?" the woman asked. Rachel held him tighter. "Yes." The woman crouched down, slowly, as if not to scare her. "What's his name?" "Eli. He's hungry." Rachel didn't answer. The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small pouch. From it, she took out a folded piece of paper, a pen, and a $10 bill. Her fingers hovered, waiting. "I work at a private clinic," she said. "There's a couple, older, wealthy, can't have kids. They are looking for a baby. A healthy one. Yours fits the bill." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the woman said softly, "you can give your baby a future. One you'll never be able to afford. You're sleeping in filth. You can't even feed him. But I know people who can." Her hand extended the money. Rachel stared at the $10 bill like it was a serpent. The woman continued. "You'll sign here. Full surrender. No contact. It'll be like he never existed. But he'll live in a mansion. Go to school. Eat 3 meals a day. He'll be safe." Rachel looked down at Eli. His lips were dry. His breathing shallow. "But I never see him again." "No," the woman said. "But he'll live." For the first time, Rachel felt like she couldn't breathe. Her chest rose and fell in panicked gasps as her mind split in two, one side begging her to protect her child, the other whispering that he would die if she didn't let go. She wanted to scream. To run. But she had nowhere to go. The woman waited, the pen still in her hand. "Will they love him?" Rachel asked finally, her voice cracking. The woman blinked, just once. "Yes." Rachel bit her bottom lip until it bled. She rocked Eli once more. He was so small, so innocent, so warm. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my baby." Then, with shaking hands, she took the pen and signed her name on the line. The woman handed her the $10 bill. Crisp, blue, smelling like it didn't belong in this world. Rachel held her son one last time, burying her face in his chest, inhaling his scent as if it were the last breath she would ever take. And maybe it was. The woman stepped forward gently. "It's time." Rachel nodded. She placed Eli into the woman's arms. His tiny fingers curled instinctively around the air, looking for her. She turned and walked away, stumbling as if drunk. Her hands were empty now. Her arms were cold. Her soul, quieter than it had ever been. Behind her, the woman whispered into the baby's ear, "Don't worry, little one. Your life begins today." Rachel didn't look back. Elliot Kingsley stood at the edge of the stage, the lights casting a golden halo around his sharp black suit. 1,000 faces stared up at him, investors, journalists, admirers. Some whispered, others recorded. Every breath in the room seemed to pause, waiting for him to speak. At just 20 years old, he had launched a groundbreaking tech company that turned basic communication software into a billion-dollar air empire. He had been on the cover of Forbes, dubbed the future of Silicon Valley. But right now, standing behind the sleek glass podium, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt distant, detached, like he was standing inside a life someone else had chosen for him. I want to thank everyone who believed in me, Elliot began, his voice deep but calm. But tonight isn't about money or apps. Tonight, we launched the Kingsley Orphan Fund, a $1 billion trust dedicated to children with no one to fight for them. Because I was one of them. A ripple of murmur swept through the audience. Elliot's smile was faint. I was adopted, he continued. And though I had a good life, I've always wondered where I came from. Who held me first? Why they let me go? Silence. Maybe I'll never know. But I do know this, no child should feel disposable. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. But Elliot barely registered it. His eyes drifted upward toward the blinding lights, his mind already far from the crowd. Later that night, he sat alone in the back seat of a black Maybach, cruising through the San Francisco hills toward his mansion. The city glittered outside like a promise too perfect to trust. He closed his eyes, and there it was again. The same dream. A woman in the shadows, crying. Her face always blurred, but her sobs were clear. She held something, someone. A child. And every time, right before he reached out to her, he woke up. Elliot opened his eyes and leaned forward. Thomas, he said to his driver, take the long way home. Yes, sir. As the car glided through the quiet streets, Elliot's thoughts turned to the people who raised him, Charles and Diana Kingsley. Old money. Real estate royalty. They had given him everything, the best education, tutors, summer homes, global exposure. And yet, there had always been a void. He remembered being 6, asking Diana why he didn't look like her. She had laughed too quickly, brushing it off as a silly question. But as he grew older, the answers grew thinner. At 12, he'd found a locked drawer in his father's study. Inside, a faded document labeled, Private Transfer of Custody, Non-Reversible. No names. Just a date. The same day as his birthday. At 16, Elliot had pressed them again. Who gave me away? Diana had grown tense. We adopted you, Elliot. Isn't that enough? He never asked again. But now, that hunger, the ache for truth, was back. Stronger. The mansion gates opened silently as the Maybach pulled in. The estate stretched across acres of manicured gardens and marble columns. Inside, the house was cold, modern, museum-like. Elliot walked to his study, stripped off his jacket, and poured himself a glass of bourbon he wouldn't drink. He opened his laptop, searched closed adoptions in California 20 years ago, and sighed. Nothing. Every record sealed. Every lead dead. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Why now? Why, when he had everything, did it still feel like something was missing? Meanwhile, in the same city, a woman scrubbed a greasy diner floor under flickering fluorescent lights. Rachel. She hummed quietly to herself, a lullaby she hadn't sung in decades. She didn't even realize she still remembered it. A child's lullaby. Her knees ached. Her palms were red and raw. But she had made peace with this life, at least, that's what she told herself. Sometimes she would imagine him, Eli. Was he safe? Did he grow up happy? Did he ever wonder about the mother who gave him away for $10? $10. It haunted her every day. She never spent it. She had kept the bill for years, folded in a tin box, until a fire in her last apartment destroyed everything she owned. Now, only the memory remained. And the guilt. Back in his study, Elliot closed the laptop and opened a side drawer. There, tucked beneath a leather-bound notebook, was a silver locket he had worn as a baby. He had never opened it before. Something about it had always felt sacred. Final. He hesitated. Then, with a click, it opened. Inside was a faded photo. A young woman with large eyes, tired but beautiful, holding a baby to her chest. Her arms were thin. Her smile, broken. His heart stopped. He stared at her face. Somewhere, in the deepest part of his soul, it felt familiar. Rachel coughed into her elbow as the steam from the diner's dishwasher clouded the backroom. The smell of fried grease, overcooked eggs, and ammonia clung to her uniform, a faded pink apron 2 sizes too big. She adjusted the knot at her waist and continued scrubbing a stack of old trays, ignoring the aching throb in her lower back. At 39, Rachel felt twice her age. Table 5 left a mess again, grunted Carla, the head waitress, as she passed by. You might wanna hit it before the boss starts barking. Rachel nodded silently and set the tray aside. Her feet shuffled in worn-out sneakers that had lost all support, soles flapping slightly as she walked toward the front. The diner was a tired place, like her. Red vinyl boots with tears in the cushions. Faded ketchup bottles. A neon sign outside that flickered constantly, more dead than alive. She reached table 5. Syrup smeared across the surface. Crumbs everywhere. A used napkin sat bunched near the window, covering a half-eaten pancake. Rachel grabbed the rag from her apron pocket and began to wipe slowly, rhythmically, as if every stroke gave her time to breathe. Outside, the TV in the corner buzzed loudly, playing a local news segment. She usually ignored it. But something in the anchor's voice caught her ear. And at just 20 years old, Elliot Kingsley has become the youngest tech billionaire in Silicon Valley history. Rachel's hand stopped. She turned slowly to look. On the screen was a young man in a sharp gray suit, speaking at a large gala. His eyes were fierce, but kind. He looked confident. Charismatic. Almost unreal. Behind him, a banner read. Kingsley Orphan Fund, /$1 billion for the forgotten. Rachel dropped the rag. Elliot. She whispered, barely able to form the name. Carla turned around. Oh. You okay? Rachel didn't respond. She stepped closer to the TV, heart pounding, her breath caught between ribs that suddenly felt too tight. The camera cut to a close-up of Elliot's face. He smiled gently at the crowd and said, I've always wondered where I came from. Who held me first? Why they let me go? Maybe I'll never know. But no child should feel disposable. The word slammed into Rachel like a wave. Her legs buckled. She grabbed the counter for support. The date. His face. That name, Kingsley. She remembered it. The name was on the form she signed all those years ago. A couple. Diana and Charles Kingsley. Her lips trembled. Could it be? Was the baby she had sold? That baby, now this man. After her shift ended, Rachel didn't go straight home. She found herself sitting in a small internet cafe 6 blocks from the diner. The place smelled of stale coffee and fried snacks, the lights dimmed to hide how dated the computers were. She sat in front of an old desktop, dropped a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, and muttered, 30 minutes. The clerk barely looked up. Rachel typed slowly. Her fingers weren't used to the keyboard. Elliot Kingsley birth date. Elliot Kingsley adoption. Charles and Diana Kingsley, California. Each result brought more confirmation. Same city. Same year. His birthday, April 2nd, exactly the day she gave him away. Her son. Her baby. He was alive. Rich. Brilliant. The world adored him. And he had no idea who she was. Rachel stared at a high-res photo of him at the tech gala. He had her eyes. Her lips. A slightly crooked right ear, just like hers. But what shattered her completely was the faint, heart-shaped birthmark peeking from under the edge of his collarbone. She remembered kissing that mark when he was just hours old. A sob escaped her throat. The clerk gave her a strange look. Rachel didn't care. She clicked through image after image. In one, Elliot held a foster child in his arms, smiling with eyes full of compassion. In another, he stood beside dignitaries, looking like a prince in a sea of kings. But no matter how far he'd risen, she still remembered him as the little boy who cried against her chest, hungry, helpless, and hers. That night, Rachel sat in her small rented room above the hardware shop she cleaned part-time. The room was barely large enough to fit a single bed, a plastic chair, and a suitcase she never unpacked. On the wall above the bed, taped and yellowed with age, was the only surviving photo she had of baby Eli, wrapped in a hospital blanket, eyes barely open. She touched the edge of the photo with trembling fingers. "I saw you today," she whispered. "Not in person. But I saw you." She could hardly believe it. Her son wasn't dead. He wasn't sick or lost or struggling. He was a giant, walking among the world's elite. And he had no idea she existed. For hours, Rachel sat there, clutching the image of Elliot on her screen, alternating between awe and guilt. The past came rushing back in jagged pieces. That cold afternoon at the bus station. The mysterious woman in the grey coat. The $10 bill. The aching emptiness she carried every day since. What if he hated her? What if he already knew and stayed away? Or worse, what if he never once thought about the woman who gave him life? But deep down, Rachel knew. She had to see him. Just once. Even if from afar. She didn't want money. Or forgiveness. She just wanted to know if he was okay. If he was loved. If he had ever missed her, even a little. The pain in her chest was unbearable. But beneath it, there was a flicker of something else. Hope. For the first time in 20 years, Rachel had a reason to wake up with a beating heart. And maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The morning after discovering Elliot's identity, Rachel woke before sunrise. She hadn't truly slept, just dozed in and out of dreams where her baby boy turned into a stranger wearing designer suits. Each time she reached for him, he walked away, swallowed by flashing cameras and limousine doors. Now, she sat in front of her cracked mirror, brushing her tangled hair slowly. Her eyes were puffy. She hadn't cried this much in years. But something had changed. For decades, she had merely survived, mopping floors, eating from vending machines, living in shadows. But now, with just a glimpse of her son's face, something stirred in her chest that had been buried long ago. A purpose. She had to find him. Even if it meant facing rejection. Even if it ended in heartbreak. She just needed the truth. Rachel returned to the internet cafe the next day. The same clerk nodded at her without looking, already recognizing her. This time, she dug deeper. She searched every article, watched every interview, followed every digital trail that might lead her closer. A Reddit thread mentioned Elliot's favorite cafe in the Mission District. Another article mentioned a silent investor buying up rundown buildings near the old civic center, places Rachel had cleaned once, years ago. She printed every piece she found and folded them neatly into a file. She couldn't afford private investigators, but she had determination. That was free. Meanwhile, across town, Elliot was spiraling. After opening the locket and seeing the photo, he couldn't focus. His assistant noticed. Investors noticed. But Elliot didn't care. At breakfast with his adoptive parents in their Glasswood estate, he set down his coffee cup and asked calmly, "Can I see the original adoption papers?" Diana Kingsley froze mid-bite. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Why? I need to know." Diana exchanged a glance with her husband, her eyes already brimming with panic. "Elliot, we told you, we don't have all those documents anymore. It was a closed adoption. Private. You don't have any of it?" he asked softly. "No," Charles said firmly. "And honestly, digging into this won't help you. You're already whole." But Elliot didn't feel whole. He hadn't felt whole in years. He excused himself from the table and walked straight to his personal study. Once alone, he unlocked the cabinet behind his desk, pulling out a thick envelope marked confidential. He had lied. He had the papers. At 16, when Diana was out of town, he had snooped through her safe and found the original document, Private Custody Transfer, March 31, 2005. Signed by Rachel L. Thompson. No address. No birth certificate. Just that name. Now, with trembling fingers, Elliot typed it into every database he could access. But Rachel L. Thompson was a common name. Hundreds of results. Thousands. He narrowed the search, by date, by city, by age group. Still too many. But he refused to give up. Something inside told him she was alive. Watching. Waiting. Back in her small room, Rachel had just finished circling an address on a printed map. Kingsley Innovations, corporate headquarters. She couldn't just walk in and say, "Hey, I might be your mother." She had no proof. No photo. Not even that cursed $10 bill. All she had was her memory, and a hope that Elliot would look into her eyes and somehow know. She couldn't sleep that night. She tried praying again, for the first time in years. "God, I don't deserve to be forgiven. But please, just let me see him once." 2 days later, dressed in her cleaner's blouse and a second-hand blazer she bought from a thrift store, Rachel stood across the street from the Kingsley Innovations building. The structure was modern, towering, all glass and silver steel. People in expensive suits walked in and out. A security guard patrolled the entrance. Rachel suddenly felt like a ghost in broad daylight. She walked past once. Then again. Her hands shook. She couldn't bring herself to cross the street. That's when it happened. A black car pulled up. The door opened. And Elliot stepped out. Rachel's breath hitched. He was taller than she imagined. Confident. Polished. A man built from steel and purpose. He adjusted his cufflinks and gave a nod to the guards. She took a trembling step forward. He turned, just slightly. Their eyes met. Just for a second. And Rachel froze. Did he recognize her? But then he turned away, his phone buzzing. He answered it and walked into the building without a second glance. She stood there, shattered, heart pounding so hard she thought she'd faint. No hug. No gasp. No "Mom." Just a glance and gone. Inside his office, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that something had just happened. Something important. He stood by the window and looked down at the street. But whoever had been standing there was gone. He pressed a button on his desk. Call security. Pull footage from this morning's front entrance. I need to see who was outside. Back in her room, Rachel told herself that it was enough. She saw him. He looked healthy. Happy. That should be enough. But the hollow ache inside her chest whispered otherwise. He didn't know her. Didn't recognize her. She was a stranger to her own son. And the question that haunted her for 2 decades came roaring back, more painful than ever. Did I do the right thing? Rachel hadn't planned to return to work so soon. After seeing Elliot outside the towering Kingsley building, her body felt like it had been through a storm, shaky, sore, heavy with disappointment. She stayed in bed most of the next day, watching the rain tap against her small window, trying to convince herself she had imagined the entire moment. Maybe it hadn't even been him. Maybe her mind, so starved for closure, had painted a fantasy on someone else's face. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was him. It was Eli. And he hadn't seen her. That Monday, she was back at work at the Mission Street Community Center, a low-income facility where she cleaned the floors and helped with evening meals. It paid little, but it fed her. And sometimes, it gave her moments, brief flickers of purpose, when she handed a sandwich to a hungry child or wiped the tears from a mother who had just been evicted. She was mopping the entrance hallway when she heard the buzz. A black SUV had pulled up outside. It wasn't unusual, sometimes donors came in, but they never stayed long. They wrote checks and left without touching anything. She didn't bother looking up. The door opened. She heard footsteps, shiny shoes on tile. Voices. One young, confident. The other, nervous. Mr. Kingsley, we're honored. The children are in the rec room. Should I bring out the welcome sign? Rachel's hand froze. Mr. Kingsley. She gripped the mop tighter, her back still turned, her body suddenly cold. You don't have to make a big deal, Elliot's voice answered, calm but warm. I'm not here for a photo op. Just wanted to see the place. Her heart skipped. Why here? Why now? Rachel turned her head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse from the side. There he was. In person. Again. Wearing a casual jacket over a designer shirt, jeans, clean white sneakers, he looked more approachable than he had in the media. But still powerful. Still untouchable. He looked around the entrance hall. His eyes scanned the walls, the shelves, the faded photos of former volunteers. And then, they landed on her. Rachel quickly looked down, pretending to scrub the floor. Her hands trembled. She prayed he wouldn't recognize her, but also prayed that he would. He walked closer, quietly. Hi, he said gently. Rachel stiffened. You work here? She nodded, not meeting his eyes. Yes, sir. Just cleaning stuff. You do great work, he said sincerely. Place looks spotless. Rachel opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Say something, she begged herself. Say his name. Ask him if he ever wondered. Show him the photo. But she couldn't. She was still that girl from the alley. Still the one who had given him away. Thank you, she whispered. He looked at her a moment longer. Something flickered in his gaze, like déjà vu recognition. No. It faded before it could land. He smiled politely and moved on. Rachel stayed frozen, her mop resting in the bucket, her lungs refusing to breathe. Elliot spent the next hour touring the center. He shook hands, watched a young boy show off a Lego tower, and handed out a few signed gadgets from his tech line. He listened as the director explained their funding needs, nodding, making notes. But his mind kept drifting. To the janitor. There was something about her. Something strange. It wasn't just the way she looked at the floor when he spoke. It was how still she became, like someone carrying a secret. Or pain. And her eyes. There was something in them. Not fear. Not shame. Grief. That evening, Elliot sat in the back of his SUV, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed at the rain sliding down the glass. Pull the footage from the community center today, he told his assistant over the phone. Find out who that woman is. The janitor. Should I alert the PR team? Was there an incident? No, Elliot replied. Just get me her name. Back at her tiny room, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her old wrinkled photo of baby Eli. Tears traced her cheek silently. She had been close enough to touch him. He had looked her in the eye. And still nothing. How could he not know? Would her son feel it? Would something stir inside him, even if he couldn't explain why? She clutched the picture to her chest. Forgive me, she whispered. The next morning, Rachel was called into the supervisor's office. She thought she was being fired. Instead, the woman behind the desk looked nervous, flipping through a paper. You were requested, she said. Mr. Kingsley wants you to help clean a tech outreach office across town. Just a one-day assignment. Special request. Rachel blinked. He requested me. The woman nodded. Said he remembered you. Rachel's chest tightened. Why? Later that afternoon, Rachel arrived at a sleek, minimal office building in the heart of downtown. She stepped inside, the air cold and pristine, the scent of glass cleaner sharp in her nostrils. A man in a navy blazer greeted her. Miss Rachel Thompson. She nodded slowly. He led her into a quiet private lounge, where a tea tray waited on the table. And across from it, seated in a modern leather chair, was Elliot. Alone. He looked up as she entered. Rachel froze. He stood. Thank you for coming, he said gently. She swallowed. Her throat was dry. Why, me? He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. There's something about you, Elliot said. I don't know why. But when I saw you yesterday, it felt like I'd met you before. In another life. Rachel's knees trembled. She looked into his eyes. And for a second, just a second, she saw it flicker. Recognition. Rachel sat in front of Elliot Kingsley in a room too perfect to hold pain. Silence paused between them, soft, sharp. She could barely breathe. He watched her with that same look, curious, calm, but something deeper had cracked through the surface. Like an old memory trying to claw its way out of darkness. Finally, she spoke. Voice trembling. Do you know who I am? Elliot's brow furrowed. No. But I feel like I should. Rachel pulled a folded, nearly worn-through photograph from her coat pocket. Her hands shook as she placed it on the table between them. It was a baby. Wrapped in a grey hospital blanket. His tiny fist in the air. A faint birthmark visible on his chest. Elliot leaned forward slowly, his eyes scanning it. I've seen this before, he murmured. My foster mother had this in a drawer. She told me it was the only thing left when they found me. Rachel's voice broke. That's because I gave it to them. With you. Elliot's eyes widened. The silence stretched. I was 17. Homeless. Starving. You were crying and sick. I didn't know what else to do. I wrapped you in that blanket. I left the photo. I waited until someone took you. Tears streamed down her cheeks now. I sold you. For $10. That's what I was paid to keep quiet. Elliot leaned back, his expression unreadable. Rachel looked down. I never stopped thinking about you. Never. He stood up slowly, pacing the room. Running his hand through his hair. You're saying, you're my mother. She nodded. He stared at her. His breath heavy. Rachel waited for him to scream. To walk out. To call her disgusting. Instead, he sat down again, eyes locked on hers. I never knew anything about my birth parents, he said slowly. Foster homes. Then adoption at 8. I spent years wondering if someone had abandoned me, or if I was just forgotten. His voice cracked. I was never angry. Just empty. Like something was missing. Rachel wept into her hands. Elliot reached out and placed his hand gently on top of hers. You were just a kid. And you didn't abandon me. You watched until I was safe. Rachel nodded through tears. But I still sold you. How can you forgive that? He hesitated, then gave a broken smile. Because you cared. Because you remembered me when the whole world didn't. A long, aching silence settled. Then. I want to know more, Elliot whispered. They spent the next 2 hours talking. Rachel told him everything, how she had run from an abusive stepfather. How she lived under bridges. Ate from trash cans. How she had tried to breastfeed despite being malnourished. How she begged a church to let her stay one night before the birth. How the $10 she took was for food, but she never touched it. Elliot listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just closing his eyes and breathing slowly, like trying to absorb 2 decades of lost history. I never married, Rachel admitted. I never had other kids. I always felt like I didn't deserve to start over. He looked at her. You don't have to be alone anymore. The next morning, Elliot's legal team quietly began paperwork. He moved Rachel out of the shelter and into a secure apartment overlooking the city. He gave her access to medical care. New clothes. Her own phone. She cried the first night, overwhelmed. But it didn't end there. Elliot took her to meet his adoptive family, a humble couple who embraced her with surprising warmth. She gave you life, Elliot told them. And without her choices, I wouldn't be who I am. Then came the part that shook the world. Elliot made a public announcement during a gala charity event. Cameras flashed. The crowd fell into stunned silence. He took the mic. I want to introduce someone who changed my life before I even had one. Rachel stepped forward slowly, dressed in a simple gown, her hands shaking. This is my birth mother, Elliot said, voice steady. She gave me up not because she didn't love me, but because she did. The crowd erupted. Within hours, headlines screamed. Coalition, billionaire reunites with birth mother who sold him $4/$10. Newspaper, she was homeless. He became a CEO. Now they're family again. Broken heart, the $10 baby, now what $20 billion. Rachel's face was everywhere. Talk shows. Podcasts. A streaming documentary. Some praised her. Others judged her. But she held her head high. Because for the first time, her shame had turned into story. And her story had turned into healing. Late one evening, she and Elliot sat on a quiet rooftop. The city sparkled below them. Rachel looked at her son, now a man, with pride and awe. I still don't know why you chose to forgive me, she said. Elliot took her hand. Because you gave me life twice, he replied. Once at birth, and once when you told me the truth. 6 months later. Rachel stood in front of a small, bustling community center in the very part of the city where she once begged for food. She wore a tailored suit now, nothing flashy, just confident. Her hair was brushed back, and her name was etched in gold on a plaque that read, The Elliot Foundation, Women and Children's Shelter. Inside, reporters gathered, capturing the moment as she cut the red ribbon. Children cheered. Volunteers clapped. But Rachel's eyes were locked on the boy, now a man, standing beside her. Elliot smiled softly, one hand on her shoulder. This place, she said into the mic, is for every girl who's ever felt like she didn't have a choice. Every mother who gave up more than she had. Every child who deserves a better future. We can't undo the past, but we can build something better out of it. The crowd erupted in applause. But Rachel couldn't help the lump in her throat. She thought back to that cold night behind the bus station. How she had handed her baby to a stranger and walked away with $10 and a shattered soul. Now, she was giving something back. A piece of herself. A promise that no one else would have to make the choice she did, not if she could help it. Later that night, Elliot drove her to a quiet hilltop where the city lights stretched like constellations below. "I have something for you," he said, stepping out of the car. Rachel raised a brow. "I've told you, I don't need gifts." He chuckled. "It's not a gift. It's a memory." From the back seat, he pulled out a small, weathered box. Inside was the original photograph, the one she had wrapped with him before letting him go. And next to it, a baby blanket. Thin. Gray. Clean but still faded with time. Rachel gasped. "You kept it." "I asked my adoptive mom to find it. She kept everything." She said something told her it mattered. Rachel held the blanket to her face, tears slipping quietly. Then Elliot handed her a letter. "It's from the woman who took me that night. The one who gave you the $10. Rachel opened it with shaking hands. "Rachel. You never knew my name. I was an intermediary for a private adoption agency. At the time, I thought I was doing something good, giving babies a future. But I carried your face with me for years. I never forgot your eyes when you handed him over. That wasn't abandonment. That was love. I just want you to know. I never took another child after that night." Dr. Marianne Keller. Rachel wiped her tears and smiled. Even she changed. Months passed. Then a year. Rachel now worked as director of the shelter. She spoke at fundraisers, partnered with healthcare providers, opened job training programs for homeless single mothers. The shelter expanded to 3 cities. She still lived humbly, still rode the subway some days, still kept a $10 bill in a small frame above her desk. A reminder not of shame, but of the cost of survival and the value of redemption. Elliot's company also changed. He funneled millions into initiatives for foster children, scholarships for orphans, mental health programs. He stepped away from day-to-day operations and began writing a memoir, The $10 Son. The book became a bestseller. One day, while Rachel was preparing lunch at the shelter, a young girl named Eva approached her. She was barely 16, pregnant, terrified, eyes hollow with fear. Rachel sat her down. "Let me guess," she said. "You think you're out of options?" Eva nodded silently. Rachel reached across the table, taking her hand. "I once thought that too," she whispered. "But someone out there needs you to survive this. You just haven't met them yet." Tears fell from Eva's eyes. But she nodded, and chose to stay. That night, Rachel called Elliot. "I think I saved a girl today." Elliot smiled on the other end. "No, Mom. You saved another one." A year later, Evie gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. And on the day of the baby's dedication ceremony, Rachel held her close and whispered, "You're proof that pain can become purpose, and love can begin again." Here is the extended epilogue, /1000 words, for your story. She sold her baby for $10, not knowing he'd become a billionaire 20 years later. 10 years later. The morning sun cast long golden rays across the rooftop of the Elliott Foundation's newest women's center, built in the heart of the city where Rachel had once walked barefoot, hungry, with her newborn wrapped in a torn blanket. Now, the building shimmered in soft white stone and glass, surrounded by gardens, laughter, and murals painted by the women and children who lived there. Rachel stood on the rooftop balcony, watching the traffic flow below like a memory she could no longer touch. Her reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but wiser. She no longer walked with the weight of guilt on her back. She walked with purpose. At 49, she had become a symbol in the city. Not a billionaire. Not a celebrity. But something rarer, a woman who had lost everything and still managed to build something. Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. "You're not writing your speech again, are you?" She turned. Elliot, now 30, stood at the door in a tailored navy suit. He still wore the same thoughtful expression he had as a boy, but with confidence now. "Grace." He walked like a man who had found who he was, not through wealth, but through forgiveness. "I'm tweaking it," she said, smiling. "You know I like to say things just right." He walked up beside her, leaned on the railing. "You always say things right." Rachel looked at him, eyes glassy. "Not always." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that only belongs to two people who have shared a bond beyond explanation. A bond neither biology nor time could break. Then Elliot handed her something. A letter. Sealed with gold wax. She raised a brow. "What's this?" "It's from the child I used to be," he said. "I wrote it years ago. When I was 18. But I was too scared to give it to you. Then, too proud. Then, too busy. But now I think you should read it." Rachel opened it slowly, carefully. Inside, in slightly shaky teenage handwriting, was this. "Dear Rachel. I don't know if I'll ever see you. Maybe I'll just keep imagining your face from the one photo my mom kept hidden in the back of her closet. Maybe you gave me away because you didn't want me. Or maybe because you had no other choice. I've hated you, you know. On nights when I felt like a mistake. When I wondered why my friends had mothers who picked them up after school, and I didn't. But deep down, I always wanted to know you. Then I found out what really happened. I know now that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it means letting go so someone can live. And if you ever read this, I just want to say, thank you for saving me, even when it hurt you. I'm not angry anymore. I just miss what we lost. But I'm glad we found each other again. I love you. Elliot." Rachel couldn't stop the tears. She didn't even try. Elliot hugged her, and they stood there, mother and son, no longer fractured by time, by pain, or by choices made in desperation. Just two souls who had finally come home. Later that day, the city mayor stepped up to the podium at the Elliot Foundation Gala. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "it is my great honor to present this year's Humanitarian Lifetime Achievement Award to a woman who once had nothing but gave everything." The room erupted as Rachel walked onto the stage, wearing a simple black dress, her silver hair tied back. As she took the microphone, she glanced at Elliot, front row, smiling. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "When I was 19, I made a decision that haunted me for 2 decades. I gave up my child, not because I didn't love him, but because I loved him so much, I couldn't let him die with me. That boy became a man. A brilliant, kind, generous man. And one day, he came back and said something I never expected to hear, 'Let's build something together.'" She paused. "And so, we did." The applause was deafening. But for Rachel, the only thing that mattered was Elliot's proud eyes. Rachel sat in a sunlit backyard garden. She was surrounded by children, not orphans, not runaways, but children who had families again. Some adopted. Some reunited with their mothers. Some thriving through the very programs she had helped create. A little girl with curly hair ran up to her. "Nana Rachel. Nana Rachel. Come see what I drew." Rachel laughed, setting aside her tea. She walked over and knelt beside the girl, whose drawing showed a tall building, a woman in a cape, and dozens of smiling kids. "Who's this?" she asked. "You," the girl said. "You save kids. You're a superhero." Rachel ruffled her hair. "Superheroes wear masks, sweet girl. I just wear love." Years later, long after Elliot had stepped into fatherhood himself, long after Rachel had retired from public life, a visitor arrived at her modest home by the sea. Eva, now in her late 20s, with her daughter, Hope, by her side. The very same girl Rachel had once convinced Eva to keep. Hope held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Hi," she said shyly. "My mom says you helped save both our lives." Rachel smiled warmly. Her hands had aged. Her back ached more than it used to. But her spirit, unshakable. "I didn't save you," she said. "I just stood beside you long enough for you to save yourself." Hope leaned in and hugged her. And in that moment, Rachel realized something. The $10 she once received had never been the true cost of her sacrifice. The real price had been years of pain, regret, and loneliness. But the return? Generations of healing.